Hey guys, tonight, we step quietly into a world where marriage is less about champagne toasts and first dances and more about centuries-old customs that would make your modern wedding planner faint. Imagine this: the air is heavy with the smell of beeswax, and old stone shadows crawl along the walls, and somewhere down the corridor, you hear the slow creak of wooden doors that haven't been oiled since the last siege. You're in a castle, yes, but not the Disney kind. This is medieval Europe, and you probably won't survive this night without at least 3 awkward stories to tell your grandchildren. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is right now. I love knowing who's listening and from where. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door closes behind you with a dull thud, and already the dimness seems thicker, like you've stepped into honey. The chamber is lit by tallow candles, thick, pale, and sputtering, with the occasional hiss, as though they disapprove of your intrusion. The walls, hung with heavy wool tapestries, depict saints and hunters, though the faces seem to watch you a little too closely. You notice the bed first, tall carved oak posts reaching upward like skeletal arms, the canopy above darkened by years of smoke. In this time, a bed isn't just furniture. It's a stage, a throne, and sometimes a battlefield. Historians still argue whether the elaborate drapery was meant purely for warmth or to give the illusion of privacy, when in truth privacy was never fully granted to a couple on their wedding night. The candles are placed deliberately positioned, so the glow falls across the bed rather than the corners of the room. It's as if the rest of the chamber doesn't matter. This single piece of furniture is the center of the ritual. You can smell the faint tang of iron from the bed's fittings mingled with the waxy scent of the candles, and something more herbal, almost medicinal. Somewhere under the mattress, hidden in the folds, are charms, though you won't find those until later. You move closer, and the boards beneath your feet complain in long, groaning notes. A fringe detail you might not expect in certain parts of medieval France. The bedding chamber would be prepared with an almost theatrical flourish, the steward or senior maid fussing over the exact placement of every pillow and blanket. One wrong fold, and the symbolism could be all wrong. The bedspread, often embroidered with family crests or fertility motifs, acted as both a status display and a silent reminder of the families now bound together. You might notice embroidered hairs or pomegranates, little symbols hidden in the weave. The temperature here is uneven, a sharp chill near the stone walls, but warm air lingering around the bed, trapped by the fabric canopy. In the corner, a low wooden chest sits partly open, revealing folded linens, and oddly, a small dish of salt. In many parts of Europe, salt was thought to purify the room and protect the couple from envious spirits. It's a simple touch, but you can imagine the mother-in-law-to-be sprinkling it earlier, muttering just loud enough to be heard. From outside, faint music seeps in lute strings and the thud of a drum, but it's distant, a reminder that the celebration is happening without you. This room is a liminal space, a threshold where you are both public property and private participant. Your role is ceremonial, even if it feels deeply personal. The architecture of the chamber itself supports this thick walls for insulation, but also to muffle sound, the bed elevated on a small platform like an altar. You pause to glance at the candle flames. They bend, slightly tugged by a draft that smells faintly of smoke from the great hall's hearth. Someone downstairs is roasting meat, and for a moment the savory scent makes you think of home. But here, food is not just sustenance, it's an extension of the ceremony. Later, symbolic dishes will be brought to this very room, and whether you eat them or not, their presence will mean something to everyone watching. There's a small, curious object on the bedside table, a carved wooden figure of a woman holding a sheaf of wheat. In some regions, this was a household charm for fertility meant to ensure plentiful children and a good harvest. Whether it works or not is debatable. Historians still argue whether these talismans were genuine expressions of belief or simply decorative tradition carried forward without thought. You run your fingers over the grooves in the carving, feeling where time has smoothed them down. And then there's the sound, barely audible at first, the rhythmic shuffle of feet just beyond the door. Servants, perhaps, or family members who have a role to play later tonight. You can almost picture them waiting for the signal to enter, whispering and glancing at the latch. The medieval wedding night was never meant to be an entirely private matter. The chamber awaits, but so do the witnesses, the rituals, and the long, strange hours ahead. One candle pops, suddenly sending a small spray of molten wax onto the table. You flinch, but it's almost like the room is laughing quietly at you. You get the feeling that this bed has seen many such nights, some joyful, some tense, some perhaps disastrous. Somewhere tucked away in the shadows is your future, and it's about to knock. The knock doesn't come right away. Instead, you hear the subtle jangle of metal, a belt buckle, maybe followed by a hushed laugh. When the latch finally lifts, the heavy door groans inward, and in step the witnesses. No, not witnesses like in a modern court. These are neighbors, relatives, maybe even the village reeve, all here for one purpose: to confirm that the union is real and, how shall we put it, officially in progress. Privacy. That's a luxury for another century. In this time, a marriage isn't complete until it's not only consummated, but also acknowledged by others. Historians still argue whether these witness customs were ever truly mandatory in most regions, or whether they were more of a noble class eccentricity that filtered downward. What's certain is that they happened enough to be remembered and dreaded by newlyweds for generations. The witnesses fan into the room like curious cats, claiming the warmest corners and the best candlelight. One older man with a white beard that nearly touches his belt clears his throat like a herald. He doesn't speak yet, but his eyes are on you with the intensity of a hawk eyeing a rabbit. Another woman, her sleeves so wide you could hide a crossbow in them, carries a folded length of cloth under one arm. She is, you suspect, the keeper of the linens for later inspection. You sit, or perhaps perch, on the edge of the bed. The mattress is firmer than you expected, stuffed, not with feathers, but with straw and herbs. The witness's presence makes every movement feel exaggerated. You pull your cloak tighter, but it's no use. They can see everything worth seeing, and probably more. There's a certain choreography to their hovering. They don't simply stand and gawk. They perform small acts. One adjusts the drapery cords, letting a little more candlelight spill onto the bed. Another checks the window shutters, rattling them to ensure no stray draft can disrupt the proceedings. A younger man, maybe a cousin, produces a small clay jug from under his tunic and takes a quick swig before offering it to you with a grin. The drink is sharp and spiced, its heat rushing to your face faster than you expect. In England, especially among the gentry, there was sometimes a formal putting to bed ceremony in which a select group of friends or family literally escorted the couple to their chamber, tucked them in, and then lingered to offer blessings, jokes, or if they were feeling particularly daring, commentary on technique. In France, this was called the bedding coucher and could be boisterous or solemn depending on the region. The point was to leave no doubt that the marriage had been sealed at least in spirit, if not yet in deed. You glance toward the doorway, half hoping more witnesses won't arrive, but no such luck. A short, round woman squeezes in her hair, braided in a style that could double as a siege defense. She carries a tray of almonds and honey, setting it on the table, as though the ritual won't work without them. A tall man follows, clutching a brass candlestick that's already dripping with hardened wax, probably borrowed from the church. He plants himself beside the bed, like a sentry, eyes forward, no expression. There's a strange intimacy in being observed like this, though not the romantic kind. Every rustle of fabric, every cough, every shift on the mattress becomes a communal act. You wonder whether couples in this era ever truly relaxed on their wedding night, or whether they simply learned to perform under pressure. Historians still argue whether these customs arose from genuine belief in the need for public proof, or whether they were just another way for families to monitor alliances, dowries, and legitimacy. A quirky detail emerges in the way one of the younger witnesses keeps glancing toward the ceiling beams. You follow his gaze and spot a cluster of dried herbs hanging upside down, rosemary and rue, their scent faint but sharp. These plants were thought to protect against evil spirits and ensure fertility. The idea was that no ill-wishing neighbor or supernatural being could interfere with the night's outcome. You imagine some great aunt in years past sneaking into the chamber before sunset, muttering incantations as she tied the herbs in place. The bearded elder finally speaks, his voice low but carrying across the room. He recites something in Latin, a blessing perhaps, or a set of instructions. His words fall into a rhythm punctuated by the occasional nod from other witnesses. You don't catch every phrase, but you hear the name of a saint, maybe Saint Valentine or Saint Agnes, both associated in folklore with love and marriage. In one version of medieval English custom, young women would pray to Saint Agnes on the eve of their wedding to dream of their future husbands. Here the saint is invoked, not for dreams, but for successful waking hours. One of the women approaches the bed and begins to smooth the coverlet with slow, deliberate strokes, as though calming a restless horse. Her rings catch the candlelight, sending glints across the embroidered patterns. She tucks a corner tighter and then steps back, satisfied. Another produces a small pouch from her sleeve and discreetly slips it under your pillow. You know better than to ask. It's likely filled with something symbolic, maybe a pinch of wheat or a coin for prosperity. And then, without warning, someone begins to sing. It starts softly, a single male voice humming an old tune, but others join in weaving a melody that's equal parts lullaby and tavern song. The words are in the local dialect, but you catch enough to know they're playful, even teasing. The rhythm sways like a boat on water, drawing you into its current despite the awkwardness of the scene. As the song drifts to an end, there's a shuffle among the group. The elder nods to the tall man with the candlestick, who steps forward to place the light closer to the bed. The shadows shrink back, leaving you in a pool of warm, flickering gold. Everyone seems to lean in slightly, not touching, but close enough to feel the weight of their attention. One of the younger women giggles quickly, covering her mouth with her sleeve. It's the kind of laugh that says she's remembering her own bedding night, or perhaps imagining one yet to come. Across the room, the tray of almonds is passed around, sticky with honey, the nuts crunching softly between teeth. You can't help noticing that the doorway remains open just a fraction. Maybe it's to let in air, or maybe it's a silent signal that more guests could still join the scene. The thought makes you sit a little straighter, your mind racing through the possible scenarios still to come. And yet, amid the watchful eyes and hovering bodies, there's an odd sense of tradition holding it all together. You realize that to refuse this audience would be to insult not just the individuals here, but the generations who came before, who endured the same ritual under the same carved beams. The elder clears his throat again, signaling something, perhaps the end of this stage. Slowly, the witnesses begin to retreat. Their steps measured, their expressions unreadable. A few give small nods or murmured blessings as they pass. The tall man takes his candlestick and plants it near the door, ensuring a steady light still spills across the room. When the last one slips out, the door closes with that same heavy thud you heard earlier. The latch falls into place. For the first time tonight, the chamber is still. But you know this quiet won't last. Because in medieval Europe, the witnesses have left, but the next part of the ritual is already on its way. The stillness after the witnesses depart feels almost too deliberate, like the hush in a theater between scenes. You barely have time to adjust your breathing before you hear the distinct scrape of leather shoes on stone outside the chamber door. The latch lifts again, and this time the figure who enters is unmistakable. A priest robes brushing the rush-strewn floor, a faint scent of incense trailing behind him. He moves slowly, as if measuring each step, the heavy folds of his garment swaying with the rhythm of his walk. The hood is down, revealing a face that's more weathered than you'd expect, for someone who likely spends more time in chapels than in open fields. His eyes, though, are sharp and assessing, and they flick briefly to the bed before settling on you. In his hand, he carries a small brass aspergillum, a brush-like instrument used for sprinkling holy water, and a narrow book bound in dark leather. He doesn't smile, but there's no scowl either, just the measured neutrality of a man who's performed this act so often, it has become less ceremony and more habit. He murmurs a greeting in Latin, his voice low, and you catch the familiar rhythm of ecclesiastical phrases. In some parts of medieval Europe, it was customary for a priest to bless the marriage bed, not merely to sanctify the couple's union in the eyes of God, but to guard against the temptations of the devil, a threat taken far more seriously in an age when superstition and faith wove tightly together. Historians still argue whether this blessing was reserved for nobility, or if it occasionally trickled down to commoners who could persuade the local clergy. The priest walks to the head of the bed and pauses, opening his book. His fingers, thick with age, turn the pages with surprising delicacy. The Latin phrases flow, mixing invocations of saints with mentions of fruitful union and protection from malefic influence. It's not exactly the romantic pep talk you might want before your wedding night, but it carries the weight of centuries of belief. A fringe detail emerges in the way he sprinkles holy water, not just across the bed, but in the corners of the room. You realize he's tracing an invisible square, a protective barrier that no spirit, ill wish, or curse is meant to cross. The droplets glisten briefly in the candlelight before soaking into the old wood and fabric. And then unexpectedly, he turns toward you, raising his hand in blessing. You feel the faint splash of water against your cheek, cool and oddly grounding. He does the same for your spouse, murmuring something that sounds like a mix between a prayer and a command. It's a reminder that in this world, marriage is not only a contract between two people, it's a pact overseen by divine authority, one with expectations far beyond personal affection. In certain Italian city-states, priests were known to weave subtle political messages into these blessings, especially if the families involved held influence. A well-placed mention of unity or prosperity could be a coded encouragement to maintain alliances or a veiled warning. Whether tonight's blessing carries such undertones is unclear, but you catch the faintest tightening around the priest's mouth as he closes his book. He reaches into the folds of his robe and produces a small silver crucifix. It's not elaborate, but the surface gleams polished by countless hands over the years. He places it carefully on the table beside the bed, angling it so that it faces you directly. "To keep the night pure," he says in the common tongue, his voice softer now. Then comes something you didn't expect, a brief recitation of the Song of Songs. The verses, though biblical, are unusually sensual for scripture lines about gardens, spices, and lips like dripping honey. You realize that in medieval thought, there was no strict division between the sacred and the physical. Both were parts of the same divine design. The priest's delivery is measured, almost hypnotic, the imagery sinking into the room's already heavy air. You catch a sidelong glance from your spouse, a mix of embarrassment and amusement. The candle flames waver slightly, throwing the carved bedposts into shifting relief. You notice for the first time that the wood itself is etched with faint patterns, vines, birds, maybe even cherubs, though their expressions are strangely mischievous. It makes you wonder whether the craftsman who carved them intended the designs as blessings or private jokes. The priest finishes the reading and closes his book with a muted thump. He stands in silence for a moment, as if listening for something beyond the room. Outside, the faint hum of revelry drifts up from the hall below. Laughter, clinking cups, the steady pulse of a drum. He doesn't seem to hear it, or perhaps he's simply used to it. From within his robes, he withdraws a final object, a narrow strip of parchment, its edges crinkled ink, faded but still legible. He explains that it's a written blessing meant to be kept near the bed until the couple's first child is born. Without ceremony, he slides it beneath the mattress, tucking it near the center. You feel a subtle shift beneath you as it disappears into the straw. In some parts of Germany, similar blessings were sewn into the bedding itself, stitched between layers of fabric, where only the most curious hands would find them. Historians still debate whether these were primarily religious protections, or simply another layer of tradition piled onto an already elaborate night. The priest takes a small step back and surveys his work. Though work might be too clinical a word for what has just unfolded, there's a certain satisfaction in his eyes, but it's tempered, as if he knows the real test of the marriage won't come from blessings or charms. Without further comment, he retrieves the crucifix from the table and places it back into the folds of his robe. The holy water brush and book follow, vanishing like props at the end of a scene. He gives a final nod, a benediction without words, and turns toward the door. As he leaves, you notice something small and white on the rushes near the threshold. It's a single feather, perhaps dropped from the down of someone's cloak lining. Or perhaps something else. In some superstitions, a white feather found indoors was considered a sign of angelic presence. In others, it meant a ghost had been nearby. You're not sure which interpretation you prefer. The latch clicks as the priest departs, leaving the room once again in the dim, golden half-light. The air smells faintly of incense, now mingling with the beeswax and herbs. You feel the weight of the blessing settling into the space, as though the walls themselves have absorbed it. But the ritual is far from over. In the hallway beyond, you hear the rustle of skirts and the low murmur of voices different from the solemn tone of the priest. This will be the next wave of participants, bringing with them not scripture, but something far more tactile. You lean back slightly against the headboard, the wood cool against your shoulders. The faint warmth of the straw mattress rises through the linens. Somewhere under there lies a strip of parchment inked with blessings. Above, herbs sway gently from the beams. The chamber feels less like a room and more like a woven tapestry of beliefs, customs, and expectations, each layer laid over the last. And if the priest's blessing was meant to guard you from the unseen, what comes next will test your ability to navigate the very visible. Because now it's time for the bridal shift. The footsteps outside grow clearer, lighter than the priest's, quicker too. When the latch lifts this time, the door swings inward with more energy, and in steps a small delegation of women. Their gowns swish over the rushes, the fabric whispering in time with their movements. One carries a folded bundle of white linen draped over her forearms, as if it's a relic. You don't need anyone to tell you this is the bridal shift. The shift is deceptively plain, at first glance, long, loose white. But as the fabric catches the candlelight, you notice subtle stitching, little loops and seams placed in deliberate positions. In some regions, it's sewn with a single slit at the appropriate spot, a peculiar compromise between modesty and functionality. Historians still argue whether this slit was purely practical or also symbolic, a physical representation of the narrow passage into married life. The lead woman, a matron, with a posture that suggests she's orchestrated dozens of these nights, holds the garment aloft. She circles the bed like a general surveying the battlefield, then stops beside you. "It's blessed," she says softly, though her tone makes it clear that refusing to wear it is not an option. As they prepare you for the shift, the chamber's atmosphere shifts too. The women chatter among themselves, not in the solemn tones of the priest, but in quick bursts of humor and gossip. One jokes that if the shift's opening is sewn too tight, there's a needle and thread ready to widen it. Another remarks that in her village they just cut a hole on the spot and didn't bother with the sewing. You sense the mix of nervous laughter and centuries-old tradition. They're here to dress you, but also to keep you from thinking too hard about what comes next. You stand the rushes rustling under your feet and raise your arms as the linen slips over your head. The fabric is coarse compared to modern cotton, but freshly laundered and faintly scented with lavender. It falls to your ankles, swaying like a belle's skirt. The slit is discreet enough to vanish into a fold, unless someone knew where to look, which of course everyone here does. In some parts of Brittany, the bridal shift was decorated with red embroidery at the hem, meant to ward off evil spirits and encourage fertility. Yours has no red, only white-on-white patterns, little vine motifs, looping in symmetrical chains. You wonder if they're purely decorative, or if they hide coded blessings from the seamstress who made it. Once the shift is on, the women step back to admire their work. One reaches out to smooth the fabric over your shoulders, tugging here and there as if adjusting armor before battle. Another produces a narrow ribbon and ties it loosely at your waist. The knot is simple, but deliberate. In certain Germanic customs, the way the ribbon was tied could signal the bride's status, tight and double-knotted, for a first marriage, loose for a widow remarrying. Yours sits somewhere in between, and you can't tell if it's an accident or a subtle comment. The matron claps her hands once, and the mood shifts again. She signals to someone outside, and a young girl, probably no older than 12, slips in, carrying a shallow wooden bowl. Inside is a mixture of milk and honey, thick and pale. She offers it to you without a word. This is another layer of the ritual. The bride is to take a sip for sweetness in the marriage, while the rest is set aside for later, perhaps. For you both to share, perhaps, to be poured into the hearth as an offering. Historians still debate whether this was a pagan remnant or simply a practical midnight snack in a cold stone castle. You sip the honey clinging to your tongue and hand the bowl back. The girl bows slightly and retreats. The women linger, exchanging a few more whispered jokes. One even winks at you before they file out, the matron carrying your discarded clothing folded neatly in her arms. The door closes, but you can still hear their muffled laughter fading down the corridor. Now you're alone again, or nearly so. The bed looms, the shift hangs loosely around you, and the candlelight makes the white fabric glow faintly gold. You can feel the cool air on your legs where the slit lies hidden. It's strange this garment is meant to preserve modesty, yet in wearing it, you feel more on display than ever. A fringe detail slips into your mind. In certain rural parts of Eastern Europe, the shift was saved after the wedding night, washed, and later cut into strips to wrap the couple's newborn as a blessing. You wonder whether anyone here is already thinking that far ahead. The silence stretches, broken only by the pop of a candle and the soft rustle of the bed's canopy in the draft. You shift your weight, the straw mattress creaking slightly in response. Somewhere beyond the door, the sounds of music swell briefly, a lively reel on a fiddle clapping in time before fading again. It's as if the castle itself is breathing in slow, measured rhythms, waiting for you to take the next step in this long, layered ritual. You glance toward the table where the bowl of almonds still rests, their honey glaze catching the light. You could take one now, but you hesitate. There's a strange sense of pacing in this night, a sequence of acts as carefully arranged as any liturgy. Eating too soon might disrupt the flow, at least that's what the superstitions say. Then you hear it, a muffled thump against the door. Not loud enough to startle, but deliberate. A signal. You realize with a mix of anticipation and unease that the bedding ceremony proper is about to begin, the part where you are no longer the passive subject of blessings and garments, but the centerpiece of a staged ritual. The shift, after all, isn't just for modesty. It's for an audience. The thump at the door comes again, 3 short beats, a pause, and then the heavy creak of iron hinges. Before you can rise from the bed, they're already streaming in, friends, cousins, perhaps even the local blacksmith, all invited to witness the bedding ceremony. The air changes, instantly thicker with warmth, laughter, and the faint smell of wine clinging to breath and clothing. The bedding ceremony is not a moment of romantic privacy. It's a performance. In much of medieval Europe, this was the culmination of the day's public festivities, a deliberate blurring of the line between community celebration and the couple's first night together. Historians still argue whether this was truly about ensuring consummation or simply a raucous way of marking the end of the feast. Either way, you're about to be tucked in by half the village. They gather around the bed with practiced familiarity, as though they've done this dozens of times before. The women take one side, the men the other, each group moving in loose coordination. A pair of young men draw back the bed's heavy curtains, letting candlelight flood the linen surface. You can see that the coverlet has been smoothed to perfection, the embroidery of intertwined vines glowing softly in the flicker. One of the older women, possibly the same matron who dressed you in the bridal shift, steps forward with a folded blanket. She spreads it over you with an exaggerated flourish, earning a few chuckles from the onlookers. Someone mutters a blessing under their breath. Another makes a joke you can't quite hear, but the ripple of laughter suggests it was about the upcoming duties of the night. The men, meanwhile, fuss with the foot of the bed, tucking in corners, as though making camp before a long journey. A tall, broad-shouldered guest pretends to test the mattress, giving it a firm pat that makes the straw inside crunch audibly. Good stuffing, he says, to general amusement. In certain English manors, the bedding was accompanied by a short prayer led by the lord of the household. In others, it was much more informal, with bawdy songs and playful shoving. Tonight seems to fall somewhere in the middle, structured enough to feel ceremonial, but loose enough for wine-fueled humor to slip through. A young woman steps forward, holding a shallow dish piled with eggs. She offers it first to you, then to your spouse. The shells are still warm from being boiled, and each one has been dyed with streaks of red and gold. You take one, feeling its heat in your palm, and realize it's a fertility symbol, the smooth, unbroken surface meant to represent the hope for many children. In some places, the eggs were cracked together over the bed so the yolk would bless the sheets, though here the gesture is more restrained. You set yours back in the dish, unsure whether to eat it now or wait for a cue. As the eggs are passed around, someone begins a song. The tune is jaunty, the lyrics, though you only catch fragments, clearly meant to encourage the night's success. You hear mentions of spring lambs, blooming fields, and bees finding their hives, all metaphors that are as unsubtle as they sound. The chorus is repeated loudly enough that you suspect it's been sung at every bedding in the village for the last 100 years. One man, clearly enjoying the role of jester, steps forward to offer you a small cup of wine. It's sweet, spiced with cinnamon, and stronger than you expect. The warmth rushes to your cheeks, loosening the knot in your stomach. Your spouse gets the same treatment, along with a playful cheer from the crowd. A quirky detail emerges in the way the crowd handles the curtains. They pull them closed briefly, then open them again, as if to check that you're still there. Each opening comes with a new blessing or joke, the rhythm of it building into something almost like a game. Historians still debate whether this opening and closing ritual was symbolic, perhaps representing the gradual revealing of intimacy, or simply an excuse for comedic timing. One by one, the guests lean in to place small tokens on the bed: a sprig of rosemary for protection, a coin for prosperity, a scrap of ribbon for luck. You can feel some of these through the coverlet little bumps and edges pressing faintly against your legs. It's both comforting and strange, the weight of so many hopes literally resting on you. At some point, the matron reappears, carrying a long, narrow loaf of bread. Without a word, she breaks it in half and places the pieces on either side of the bed, as though bracketing you in. In certain regions, this was meant to feed the spirits of the room so they wouldn't trouble the couple. In others, it was a simple offering of hospitality, because even on your wedding night, you were expected to be a good host. The ceremony is winding down now, the energy shifting from rowdy to warm. Guests begin to step back, murmuring final blessings or teasing remarks. A few linger at the foot of the bed, clearly reluctant to leave, but the elder among them gives a subtle nod toward the door. Slowly, the crowd begins to file out the room, emptying one body at a time. Before the last person leaves, they do something you don't expect. They pull the bed curtains fully closed, sealing you into a cocoon of flickering gold light and faint herbal scent. The air inside feels warmer, denser. You hear the latch click softly as the door closes, followed by the fading shuffle of feet down the corridor. In the quiet that follows, you're left with the lingering warmth of the wine, the faint stickiness of honey on your tongue, and the weight of tokens hidden beneath the covers. The bed feels smaller now, as though the ceremony has tightened its walls around you. You realize this was the point all along, not just to tuck you in, but to weave you into a living tapestry of community memory. In some ways, the bedding ceremony was less about you and more about them, the family, the neighbors, the witnesses who would go home tonight with their own stories to tell. And tomorrow, those stories would become part of the lore of this household, repeated over bread and ale for years to come. But for now, the night is still young. The candles burn steady, the herbal bundles sway faintly in the draft, and somewhere outside the curtains, footsteps approach once more. You realize this isn't the end of the ritual, only the close of one act. Because next comes the strange arrival of symbolic foods meant to guide the rest of your night. The footsteps are slower this time, purposeful, and accompanied by the soft clink of pottery. When the curtains part just enough to let in a stripe of candlelight, you see a small procession enter, 3 people each carrying a tray laden with food. It's not the feast from the Great Hall. This is something more symbolic, tailored for the wedding night itself. The first tray holds a jug of warm, spiced wine. Steam curls lazily from the lip, carrying the scent of cinnamon clove and something faintly citrus. The bearer, a young servant with careful hands, places it on the table beside the bed, as if handling a sacred object. In medieval belief, wine on the wedding night wasn't just for celebration. It was considered a gentle stimulant, encouraging warmth and relaxation. Historians still argue whether its use was genuinely about intimacy or simply a way to stave off the cold in drafty stone chambers. The second tray is more curious, a shallow wooden bowl piled with boiled eggs, nuts, and small lumps of soft cheese. The eggs are unadorned, this time their shells a plain cream color, but the nuts glisten with a sheen of honey. Cheese might seem an odd choice, but in certain rural regions it symbolized abundance: cows, producing milk fields, producing grain households, producing children. The third tray makes you pause. It's smaller, and on it lies a single pomegranate split neatly in half, the seeds glistening like rubies. You've only seen such fruit at the tables of the wealthy. It must have been imported, carried across seas and over mountains. Its presence here is deliberate. In both classical and medieval symbolism, the pomegranate represented fertility, marriage, and the mingling of 2 lives. Each seed was a promise, a potential life. You can't help wondering who arranged for this extravagance and what unspoken expectations it carries. The 3 tray bearers step back, bowing slightly. The eldest among them, a thin man with a hawkish nose, clears his throat and begins to speak in the local dialect. You catch only fragments, but it's clearly a set of instructions: when to drink the wine, how many nuts to eat, the proper order for tasting the eggs and cheese. The idea seems to be that consuming these foods in a certain sequence will align the couple's fortunes with the rhythms of nature. A fringe detail catches your eye. Tucked under the pomegranate's tray is a sprig of evergreen. It's not decorative. It's rosemary tied with a strand of red thread. This was believed to bind good fortune to the couple and repel jealousy. In some areas, the rosemary was burned at dawn the next day, its smoke carrying the couple's blessings into the air. You take the first sip of wine as instructed. It's richer than you expected, the spices wrapping around your tongue before sliding warmly into your chest. Your spouse drinks next, and you pass the cup back and forth until it's empty, the jug still half full beside you. The warmth spreads slowly, a creeping heat that softens the edges of the room. Next come the eggs. You each take one, peeling the shell carefully so as not to tear the smooth white beneath. The older man nods approvingly, perhaps because you didn't break it in your hands, a bad omen in some beliefs. The egg's texture is firm, the flavor simple, almost bland, but you sense that taste isn't the point. This is about form, about completeness. The nuts follow their honey glaze, sticking to your fingers. The sweetness clings, mingling with the lingering spice of the wine. You notice the hawk-nosed man watching intently as you eat, as though counting each bite. Perhaps he has some traditions dictated: an odd number of nuts for the bride, an even number for the groom to balance fortune. Finally, the pomegranate. The elder steps forward to place it between you, his expression momentarily softening. "Share," he says in the common tongue, and steps back. The seeds burst gently under your teeth, sweet and tart all at once. Red juice stains your fingertips, dripping onto the linen, and you catch yourself glancing at the coverlet. Will they take this as another omen? Historians still debate whether pomegranates were actually common enough in medieval Europe to feature in such rituals, or whether this is the kind of extravagance reserved for noble houses. Either way, here in this moment, the fruit feels weighted with expectation, its color deepening in the flicker of the candles. When the trays are empty, the bearers collect them with quiet efficiency. They leave the wine jug, but everything else is carried away as though the food's magic has been spent in the act of consumption. The hawk-nosed man lingers a moment longer, giving a brief nod before following the others out. The curtains remain slightly parted now, letting in the sound of muffled music from the great hall below. Someone is singing the tune, lilting and slow. You recognize it from earlier in the day. It's the song they played as you approached the church. Now, though, it's softer, almost a lullaby. On the table, the sprig of rosemary lies where it was left. You reach for it, feeling the rough texture of the leaves under your thumb. In some traditions, it was placed under the pillow for luck. In others, it was worn in the hair for the first year of marriage. You're not sure which path this one will take, but for now, you slide it gently onto the mattress beside you. The warmth from the wine settles into your limbs, the sweetness of honey still lingering in your mouth. The chamber feels different now, less like a stage for public ceremony, more like a sealed box holding you and your spouse inside with the weight of every blessing, superstition, and whispered hope that's been layered onto this night. And just as you begin to settle into the quiet, the next sound comes, a sudden sharp crowing from somewhere nearby. Not outside, not in the courtyard, but within the chamber itself. You turn toward the noise, and in the far corner you see movement. It seems the rooster has arrived. The crow is loud enough to make the candles shiver. It comes again sharper, as if the bird knows it's performing for an audience. You lean forward, and in the far corner of the chamber, near the foot of an unlit wall, sconce, stands a man holding a wicker cage. Inside, shifting on its perch, is a rooster with glossy black feathers and a comb as red as sealing wax. Its eyes gleam in the dim light, catching the flicker of the candles like tiny molten coins. The man carrying it is dressed plainly, but his stance is purposeful, almost ceremonial. He sets the cage down on the rushes and steps back, folding his hands as if waiting for someone else to speak. In some parts of medieval Europe, particularly in rural France and Flanders, the arrival of a rooster on the wedding night was more than just an oddity. It was a fortune-telling moment. Historians still argue whether the bird's behavior was interpreted as a sign for fertility, prosperity, or the length of the marriage itself. A second man enters, this one older, with a face like weathered oak. He gestures toward the cage, mutters something in the local dialect, and unlatches the door. The rooster hops down to the floor with surprising grace, its claws clicking against the worn wood beneath the rushes. It struts a slow circle, head-bobbing eyes darting from you to your spouse to the bed itself. There's a tense pause. Everyone in the room, yourself included, seems to be holding their breath. In some versions of the custom, the rooster's actions decide the couple's fortune. If it crows loudly and confidently, the marriage will be strong. If it refuses to crow or acts skittish, it's a bad omen. And if it tries to leave the room entirely, well, best not to think about that one. The bird pauses near the foot of the bed, tilts its head, and lets out another crow, louder this time, sharper, almost defiant. A ripple of murmured approval moves through the onlookers. The older man nods once, clearly satisfied, and steps forward to scoop the rooster up in his arms. But it's not over yet. A quirky variation of the tradition unfolds before you. The rooster is lifted onto the bed itself. Its claws scratch lightly over the coverlet, and it makes its way to the space between you and your spouse. For a moment, it simply stands there, turning its head from side to side, as though inspecting the shift, the sheets, and perhaps the moral character of both occupants. Then, in a move that feels oddly deliberate, it pecks once at the blanket and hops down, returning to the older man's arms. The crowd exhales, the tension dissolving into soft laughter. You're told through a mixture of gestures and brief translations that the peck signifies the bird accepting the bed. Apparently, you've passed whatever test this was. The rooster is carried out its cage, following close behind, and the room settles again. But the strange symbolism lingers. In certain interpretations, the rooster's crow is a proclamation of ownership, a staking of claim over the new household. In others, it's a warning to evil spirits to stay away. Historians still debate whether the custom has roots in pagan fertility rites, early Christian symbolism of resurrection, or simple rural superstition dressed up as ceremony. As the door closes, you can still hear the faint sound of the bird's claws against the wicker cage fading down the hall. The herbal scent in the room seems sharper now, as though the energy stirred up by the rooster has reawakened every charm tucked under the mattress and sewn into the bedding. Your eyes wander to those charms. You can't see them, but you know they're there, little bundles of rosemary perhaps, or coins wrapped in cloth, maybe even bones if the local superstitions lean darker. A fringe fact you recall in some parts of the Low Countries: these bundles were left not only for protection, but also to draw the couple together like magnetic lodestones in fabric form. The logic was half spiritual, half folk magic engineering. Your spouse shifts beside you, and the bed creaks softly. The wine's warmth is still in your limbs, and the faint tang of pomegranate lingers on your tongue. For a moment, the sounds outside fade entirely, and you could almost believe you've reached the quiet part of the night. Almost. Because just as the thought settles, there's another sound, a heavy clunk of metal, the unmistakable grind of iron turning in a lock. The door bolts slide into place from the outside. You're not just inside the chamber now, you're sealed in. The rooster's crow, it seems, was only the prelude. What comes next will keep you here until the first light of dawn. The metallic grind is deliberate, almost theatrical. You hear one bolt slide, then another, each one seating itself into the stone frame, with a deep, final clunk. A pause follows, and then the sound of the heavy iron key turning in the lock, slow, twice, as if to make absolutely certain you've heard it. Whoever is on the other side doesn't speak. The silence afterward feels heavier than the lock itself. You glance toward the door, half expecting someone to announce the reason, but no voice comes. This is part of the ritual. In certain parts of medieval Europe, the newlyweds were literally locked into the bedchamber until dawn, a practice as much about superstition as about security. Historians still argue whether it was meant to seal in the luck and blessings already placed in the room, or to ensure no one could disturb the couple's privacy. Though given the events so far, privacy seems a relative term. The key in some traditions would be kept by the mother of the bride or a trusted elder, symbolizing guardianship of the union until it was considered firmly established. Here you have no idea who holds it, but the absence of that knowledge is probably the point. The fire in the hearth has burned low, a single log glowing with a slow pulse of red. Shadows stretch across the walls, deepening in the absence of movement. The chamber feels different now, less like a ceremonial stage, more like a sealed reliquary. You imagine that if you shouted, your voice might not even carry past the thick stone. A fringe detail floats up in your mind. In certain alpine villages, locking the couple in was said to keep away the Alp, a mischievous spirit, who would slip into the room to sit on a sleeper's chest, causing bad dreams and ill health. The lock, they believed, barred even supernatural trespassers. Whether you believe it or not, you can't deny the sense of containment that comes with the sound of a bolt sliding home. You and your spouse sit for a moment in the quiet, listening to the faint tick of cooling iron somewhere in the walls. The air smells faintly of beeswax and rosemary, with the sharper scent of pomegranate lingering from earlier. Outside, the noise of the feast has dimmed to an occasional burst of laughter or a muffled scrap of song. Then, faint but clear, comes another sound. A soft shuffle of steps just outside the door, followed by the gentle rattle of something being set on the floor. You lean forward, straining to hear, but the footsteps retreat almost immediately. A moment later, there's a faint scritch paper or cloth being pulled back under the door from the outside. You reach for it and find a small, folded square of linen. Inside, wrapped neatly, are three objects: a silver coin, a dried sprig of thyme, and what appears to be a tiny carved figurine of a hare. Each has its own meaning. The coin is obvious prosperity, the thyme less so. In medieval herb lore, thyme was said to bring courage and ward off nightmares. The hare, though, that one makes you pause. In some regions, the hare was a fertility symbol. In others, a trickster figure. Historians still debate whether its presence here would be read as good luck or a sly inside joke from whoever sent it. You place the bundle on the table, noting that its delivery after the lock was turned is probably intentional, an offering meant to sit with you through the sealed hours of the night. Minutes stretch. The fire pops softly, a candle gutters, and steadies again. The sealed door no longer feels like an object, but like a presence, something leaning inward from the other side. You wonder whether anyone will check on you before morning, or whether the next sound of the latch will be the one that lets you out. The lock's symbolism is layered. On one hand, it's protective, a barrier between you and any wandering spirit intruder or overly curious in-law. On the other, it's binding, a reminder that this union is no longer something you can simply walk away from. The outside world is literally barred to you until the dawn. You lie back, feeling the mattress shift beneath you. Somewhere under the straw, the priest's parchment blessing rests, hidden but constant. The scent of thyme from the bundle is already mingling with the herbs under the bed, weaving into the chamber's air. And then from beyond the door comes a final sound before the night truly stills, the faint clink of the key being hung on a metal hook. Whoever holds it has made sure it's out of reach for you and for anyone else who might be tempted to interfere. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the wine and the weight of the blankets settle over you. The chamber is yours now, but in the truest sense, it belongs to the night itself. Still, just as you begin to drift toward a lighter state of rest, you feel something under the mattress shift ever so slightly, as if the bundles of charms hidden there have been disturbed. It seems the locked door may keep people out, but not everything. The shift is subtle at first, just a faint give beneath your weight, like the mattress has settled unevenly. Then it comes again, more distinct, a small bump, almost rhythmic, directly under where your legs rest. You freeze, eyes flicking toward your spouse, but they've noticed it too. In the flicker of candlelight, you both lean forward, glancing at the bed as though it might explain itself. The sensation stops, leaving only silence and the faint pop of the log in the hearth. You're just starting to convince yourself it was the straw settling when it happens again, this time accompanied by the softest rustle, as if something is shifting inside the mattress. Your mind jumps to the bundles the priest tucked beneath earlier, along with the charms slipped under by the women before. In medieval folk belief, charms were alive in their own way, capable of subtle movement when activated by certain energies, usually the presence of the couple in bed. Historians still argue whether these stories were literal or symbolic warnings not to tamper with the contents. You pull the coverlet aside just enough to reach under the mattress. Your fingers brush something coarse, a small pouch, the fabric scratchy like homespun wool. It's lumpy with irregular shapes. Herbs, perhaps a few small stones. The scent of rosemary and thyme intensifies as you press it, almost as if the warmth of your touch is waking it. You let go quickly, unsure whether you've just respected the tradition or risked offending it. Your spouse points toward the far corner of the bed. There's another lump there, smaller and harder. You shift to touch it and find what feels like a coin wrapped in cloth stitched shut. Coins were often placed in the bed as charms for prosperity, but also as a purchase for the future children, symbolically paying fate for their safe arrival. A quirky detail in some rural parts of Scotland: bones, yes, actual animal bones, were slipped under the mattress as talismans. They were meant to tie the couple to the land, ensuring they would not move away. Whether there's one here, you can't tell, but the uneven feel beneath you suggests there are more surprises in the straw. Suddenly, from outside the curtains, you hear a muffled voice. It's low and sing-song, like someone reciting a rhyme. You can't make out the words, but the tone is unmistakably ritualistic. The voice pauses, then repeats the same lines slower this time. It's likely one of the attendants or elders performing a protective verse. In some traditions, the couple was sung to from outside the room, not to lull them to sleep, but to guard them until morning. The rustle under the mattress subsides, replaced by a warm stillness. You lie back, feeling the faint pressure of the pouches and tokens against the straw. They're not exactly comfortable, but they're not meant to be. Their purpose is to work beneath you unseen. The candle nearest the bed flares briefly, then steadies. Shadows shift over the carved bedposts, turning the cherubic faces into something more ambiguous. You catch yourself staring at one carving, in particular, a small bird in mid-flight, its wings outstretched toward a vine. You could swear it wasn't there earlier, though logic tells you it's always been part of the design. You reach for the wine jug, pouring a little into the cup left on the table. The warmth spreads through you again, loosening the knot of unease in your chest. Across the room, the hearth log collapses inward, sending up a soft shower of sparks that vanish before they touch the stones. For a brief moment, the atmosphere shifts from watchful to cocoon-like. The locked door is still there, the charm still beneath you, but the room feels less like a stage and more like a sealed sanctuary. The scent of rosemary, thyme, and faint smoke wraps around you in a protective halo. Then comes the faintest tap on the bedpost. Not from outside the curtains, this sound is from within. A soft, deliberate knock against the carved wood 3 times in slow succession. You and your spouse exchange a glance. This is no accident. It's the next part of the ritual. In certain areas of Northern Europe, the 3 knocks were a symbolic call from the ancestors, a sign that the family lineage approved of the union. In other tellings, it was the opposite. The knocks were meant to summon ancestral spirits to bear witness. Historians still debate which version is older and whether couples were comforted or unsettled by the idea. The knocks don't come again, but their echo seems to hang in the fabric canopy above. You lie back slowly, letting the heaviness of the night settle into your limbs. The mattress creaks softly as you shift the bundles beneath, giving just enough to remind you they're still there. Somewhere beyond the curtains, the murmur of voices fades. The door's lock remains silent, as though the entire castle has gone to sleep, except for this chamber where tradition is still awake and working. You close your eyes, but the image of that carved bird lingers, its wings frozen mid-flight above the bed. You wonder if, come morning, it will still be facing the vine, or something else entirely. The silence following those 3 slow knocks is dense like wool soaked through with water. You strain to hear something, anything beyond the curtains, but there's nothing except the faint hiss of the hearth and the occasional pop from a candle wick. Your mind begins to drift toward rest when another sound cuts through the unmistakable shuffle of feet outside the chamber door. It's not hurried, not stealthy, just steady, like someone pacing a short distance back and forth. Then the footsteps stop, replaced by a quiet knock on the door. This is strange, given that it's locked from the outside. You glance at your spouse. They shrug, equally unsure what this means. The knock comes again, louder. Then a voice muffled through the wood, the sheets. Your stomach sinks. This is the part of the tradition no one really enjoys talking about. In many parts of medieval Europe, the wedding night wasn't just observed, it was in a sense audited. The morning after, or sometimes even before dawn, the bedclothes might be inspected for evidence of consummation. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread formal practice, or more of a sensationalized custom reserved for noble alliances. Either way, the anxiety it caused was real enough to be remembered for centuries. You don't hear the door open, of course you don't. It's locked, but you do hear something slide beneath it, a narrow strip of cloth, clean and white. The implication is clear. Someone expects that strip to be returned with proof. It's both invasive and, in its way, absurd, the kind of ritual that blurs the line between superstition and bureaucracy. A fringe fact, in some French provinces, this evidence was paraded through the village on a staff or displayed from a window accompanied by music and cheers. In others, it was handed only to the bride's family, folded discreetly into a chest. Either way, the idea was to show that the marriage was physically sealed and therefore indisputable in the eyes of church and law. You set the strip aside for now, the linen almost glowing in the candlelight. The quiet returns, but it feels different, thicker, more expectant. The inspection is tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you're still inside the ritual's winding path. The bed creaks softly as you shift, and you feel again the small bundles beneath the mattress, herbs, coins, perhaps other charms you haven't yet found. You can't help wondering whether their placement has been arranged to ensure this very moment unfolds according to plan. In a way, the bed itself feels like a participant in the night's events, holding all the layered meanings like a stage set in perfect order. From the hearth comes a new sound. The log, which had burned low, gives a sharp crack, sending a thin plume of smoke curling upward. In some traditions, the way the fire burned on the wedding night was taken as an omen. A strong, steady flame meant endurance. A sudden crack could be read as a warning. Historians still debate whether couples actually believed in these signs, or whether it was just something for the elders to murmur about over breakfast. The smoke catches the candlelight, and for a moment it seems to form shapes, nothing distinct, but enough to make you blink. You tell yourself, it's just the play of air currents in the room, though the idea of ancestors or spirits still hovering nearby isn't exactly out of place after the knocks on the bedpost earlier. Your spouse reaches for the wine jug, pouring the last of it into the cup. The liquid is cooler now, but still sweet, still tinged with spice. You share it between you, the warmth spreading slowly outward, taking some of the edge off the silence. And then, because tonight refuses to settle into anything ordinary, there's a sudden burst of sound from below, voices, singing feet, stamping, the unmistakable hum of a crowd that's just found a second wind. The bedding ceremony might be over, but the feast downstairs clearly isn't. One voice, louder than the rest, begins a bawdy verse that sends laughter rippling through the crowd. The words are too muffled to catch entirely, but you hear enough to guess it's about the wedding night told in exaggerated metaphors. A drumbeat joins in, slow and heavy, like a heartbeat, amplified through the stone. The sound isn't unwelcome, it's oddly grounding. Down there, the world goes on, people eating, drinking, singing, making jokes at your expense. Up here, the fire crackles, the bed holds its charms, and the white linen strip waits on the table like a silent reminder of tomorrow morning's ritual. Gradually, the music fades again, or maybe your mind tunes it out. The chamber is once more just you, your spouse, and the lingering scent of herbs and smoke. The candle nearest the bed burns lower, the wax pooling thick around its base. Shadows grow longer across the coverlet, climbing the canopy like vines. You find yourself listening, not for footsteps or knocks now, but for the sound of the lock, wondering if come dawn it will be turned with the same deliberate slowness it was sealed with earlier. For now, though, the night holds. The door stays shut, and the strip of linen waits. The laughter and stamping from below have faded into a distant hum, but another sound soon takes its place, softer, more rhythmic. It's coming from somewhere just outside the chamber, drifting up through the stone floor, as if the building itself is carrying it to you. A tune rises and falls, the words blurred by distance, but you recognize the melody. It's one of the bawdy songs from earlier, slowed to a near lullaby pace. Your spouse glances at you, a faint smile playing at the corners of their mouth. It's not exactly romantic, but in its own way, it's reassuring. The village is still out there, still watching in spirit, even if the heavy bolts have turned you into honorary prisoners for the night. The singing is accompanied by a scattering of voices, male, female, and a few that sound young enough to be children. Their tones blend together, teasing, coaxing, and in some lines outright laughing. In certain parts of medieval France and Germany, the wedding night was serenaded by friends and family from outside the chamber, the intention being less to soothe and more to encourage. Historians still argue whether this tradition was purely for amusement, or if it was believed to genuinely bless the proceedings. The tune grows louder, footsteps joining in. Someone has moved into the corridor outside your door. A hand slaps the wood in time with the beat, not hard enough to rattle it, but enough to make the bolts give a dull, metallic thud. The rhythm is infectious, and before you realize it, your own fingers have started to tap against the coverlet in time. A fringe detail you've read about flashes in your mind. In certain rural English villages, the serenading wasn't just about sound. It involved bringing small instruments like fiddles or pipes to play, until the couple either made an appearance or someone paid them to stop. Considering the locked door, the first option isn't happening tonight. From outside, the song breaks into a chorus. You catch a few clear words, now references to the harvest and spring calves, unmistakable euphemisms wrapped in rustic metaphor. The laughter that follows is warm, almost conspiratorial. It's as if the whole village has agreed to keep you awake just to remind you that you're not truly alone in here. The serenade shifts into a call and response. One voice shouts a playful question, too muffled to fully catch, and a chorus of voices answers in sing-song. Your spouse chuckles quietly, shaking their head. You both know this could go on for a while. The hearth crackles softly in counterpoint to the music. The scents of thyme, rosemary, and cooling pomegranate mingling in the air. You glance at the strip of linen still folded on the table. It seems to glow a little under the candlelight, as though the song outside were aimed at that, as much as at you. Then the song stops. The silence is abrupt, almost startling. A single knock on the door follows, not the measured triple tap from before, but a single sharp rap. And then, nothing. You lean back slowly, half expecting the singing to start again, But instead a new sound rises, a scraping from the corridor below, perhaps chairs being moved or benches dragged. It seems the singers are returning to the great hall, the serenade finished. Whether this means they consider their blessing complete, or they've simply decided to refill their cups, you can't tell. Historians still debate whether these songs actually affected the couple's experience, or if they were simply part of the audience's fun. Tonight, though, you can feel their presence lingering even in their absence, like the warmth of a fire after the flames have died. The chamber feels quieter than before, but also somehow fuller, as if the echoes of the song are hanging in the canopy above. You shift under the covers, feeling the faint lumps of the hidden charms beneath you. The rhythm of the serenade is still in your body, your pulse keeping its beat. Your spouse reaches for the wine jug, now nearly empty, and pours the last drops into the cup. You share it in silence, the taste sweeter now, the spices softer. The warmth spreads not just in your limbs, but in the air itself. Outside, the castle seems to exhale. The night stretches forward, and for a few minutes there's only the fire, the faint hum of stone cooling, and the knowledge that the next part of the ritual could arrive at any moment. And it does, because the footsteps that return are not singing this time. They are purposeful, heavy, and headed straight for your door. The footsteps draw closer, their rhythm unhurried, but decisive, echoing slightly in the narrow stone corridor. You can tell by the weight of each step that this isn't a servant bringing wine or a friend delivering more almonds. Whoever is approaching carries authority, or at least the belief that they have the right to enter this sealed chamber. A shadow falls across the gap beneath the door. Then, without knocking, the latch rattles, not to open, but as if testing the lock. The bolts hold firm. A voice follows, low and steady, with the kind of tone people adopt when they expect to be obeyed. "The Lord will see you." You blink, certain you've misheard. But then the bolts begin to slide back one by one, their weight grinding in their iron housings. The key turns slowly in the lock, and the door opens inward. Standing there is the steward, a man with a face like a hawk, and a long chain of office hanging from his shoulders. Behind him, torchlight flares in the hall, and framed in it is a tall figure in deep crimson robes, trimmed with fur, the lord of the estate. His presence fills the doorway, and the air seems to cool a degree. The steward steps inside, first glancing around the chamber, as though checking that the prescribed rituals have been followed to the letter. He notes the burning log, the folded linen strip on the table, even the sprig of rosemary still resting on the mattress. Only when he appears satisfied does he step aside to admit his master. The Lord enters without hesitation. His eyes sweep over you and your spouse, lingering just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable. In medieval courts, it was not unheard of for the local ruler, whether a minor baron or a great lord, to greet a newly married couple on their wedding night, especially if the marriage had political implications. Historians still argue whether this was purely ceremonial, or if some lords genuinely enjoyed intruding on these moments. He does not sit. Instead, he gestures toward the small table near the bed, where the steward is already placing a fresh jug of wine and 2 heavy silver goblets. "Drink with me," the Lord says. The command leaves no room for refusal. You and your spouse each take a goblet, the wine inside darker and richer than the spiced one from earlier. The taste is deep, almost earthy, with a hint of something floral at the end. The Lord watches as you sip, his expression unreadable. Then he lifts his own cup and drains it in one long swallow. "To the strength of the Union," he says, setting the goblet down with a soft thunk. The steward refills the cups, and the Lord turns his attention to your spouse, asking a few clipped questions about the feast, the guests, the journey here. His tone is casual, but there's an undercurrent of assessment, as though he's gauging not just your answers, but the way you sit, the way you hold the cup. A fringe detail you remember in some noble houses, this midnight audience was considered a final moment of oversight, a chance for the Lord to affirm that the match had been properly made and that both parties were suitably cooperative. In a few darker tales, it was also an opportunity to remind the couple of their obligations, political, financial, or otherwise. After a few minutes of this measured conversation, the Lord's tone shifts. He speaks of the land of the harvest of the coming winter. It's clear these are not idle topics. He's laying out the expectations for the new household you now represent. He does not threaten, but neither does he soften. Finally, he rises. The steward is quick to step forward, holding the door open. Before leaving, the Lord fixes you with a look that is both appraising and final. "May your bed be warm," he says, and there's a faint curl at the corner of his mouth that might be a smile, or something sharper. The door closes, the bolts slide home again, and the key turns with the same slow deliberation as before. The torchlight in the hall fades, and once again the chamber is yours. But the air feels different, less yours, more marked by the presence that just left. You set the silver goblet aside. The wine still lingers in your mouth, heavy and a little bitter. The folded strip of linen is still on the table, untouched, but now it seems to carry the weight of not just family expectation, but lordly oversight as well. In the hearth, the log shifts, sending a faint cascade of ash into the grate. Outside the door, the corridor is silent again, but the echo of that midnight audience lingers as if the walls themselves absorbed every word. The silence after the Lord's departure feels heavier than before, as if the very air in the chamber has been pressed down by his presence. You glance toward the bed curtains, half expecting to see them move, as though the fabric itself might still be unsettled. The silver goblets remain on the table, catching the candlelight in dull glints, their rims still wet from the last sip. You've barely begun to relax when the latch rattles again. Not the bolts this time, just the handle. The door doesn't open, but a voice calls softly from the other side. It's time. No name, no explanation. Just that. The bolts slide back, the door creaks open, and in step 3 women. They move in single file, each carrying something. The first holds a folded piece of heavy fabric, deep cream edged in gold thread. The second carries a small brass oil lamp, its flame enclosed in a glass chimney. The third trails a length of gauzy material so sheer that the candlelight passes through it, turning it into a faint golden mist. Without a word, they approach the bed. The first woman lays the folded fabric over the footboard, smoothing it with practiced hands. The second sets the oil lamp on the table, its steady flame giving off a faint scent of myrrh. The third steps to the head of the bed, and with a slow, deliberate motion, drapes the gauzy material over your spouse. This is the masking, a tradition in certain corners of medieval Europe, particularly in Lombardy and parts of Burgundy, where the bride would be veiled not just for the ceremony, but again in the bedchamber until a set phrase was spoken. Historians still argue whether this was meant to preserve modesty or to mark a symbolic second unveiling representing the start of shared life rather than the end of the wedding day. The veil is heavier than it looks, though light passes through it in ripples. It falls to the waist, hiding the shift beneath, but not obscuring the shape entirely. The gold thread edges catch the lamplight, flashing in tiny bursts with each movement. The women step back, their work complete, and stand in a line. You realize they're waiting for you. The unspoken rule is that you must speak the phrase that lifts the veil. In some regions, this was a simple blessing, something like "May the moon see us and smile." In others, it was a riddle or a proverb known only to the couple. Here, you've been told nothing. A fringe variation you recall in a few villages of the Pyrenees, the phrase had to be whispered 3 times directly to the bride's ear, each time softer than the last. The belief was that the veil should hear the words before the woman did so, that it would release her willingly. You glance at the women, but they remain silent, their expressions neutral. Your spouse tilts their head slightly under the veil, the faintest movement, as though encouraging you to try. You choose your words, simple, respectful, but with a hint of play, and speak them into the warm, herb-scented air. Nothing happens. You try again, slower this time, your voice lower. The women exchange the briefest of glances, but still they do not move. It's only on the 3rd attempt, so quiet you can hear the faint rasp of your own breath through the veil, that the nearest woman steps forward, lifts the gauzy fabric, and folds it neatly over her arm. Beneath it, your spouse blinks in the lamplight, smiling faintly as though this is all part of some long game. The folded veil is handed to the first woman, who pairs it with the heavier gold-edged fabric. Together, they carry them toward the door, moving in slow, synchronized steps. The second woman collects the lamp, pausing to glance back at the bed one last time, before following the others out. The bolts slide home again. The chamber is darker now, without the oil lamp, the flicker of the tallow candles throwing more dramatic shadows over the carved bedposts. The air smells faintly of myrrh and beeswax, mingling with the rosemary already in the room. Historians still debate whether the masking was primarily symbolic, or whether it was simply another excuse to stage manage the couple's interactions for the benefit of tradition. In practice, it leaves you with an odd blend of intimacy and spectacle, as though you've been both audience and performer in your own private play. Your spouse leans back against the pillows, the gold thread shimmer still lingering faintly on their skin from where the veil touched it. You notice that the bed feels smaller again, crowded not with people but with the accumulated weight of all these rites, each one folding over the last. Somewhere outside, faint and far away, a bell tolls twice. Midnight has passed. The rituals have not yet run out. And as you're thinking this, the soft, triple knock returns not on the door this time, but on the wall behind your headboard. The 3 knocks are deliberate, spaced just far enough apart to make your skin prickle. They don't rattle the wall, but each one carries through the wood of the headboard, a muted thud you feel as much as hear. You sit still, straining to catch any sound that follows, but there's nothing. No footsteps, no voice, just the hush of the chamber and the low hiss of the hearth. Then the knocks come again, this time softer, almost tentative, like a question waiting to be answered. Your spouse glances at you, eyebrows raised. Neither of you moves. The 3rd time, the sound is paired with something else, a faint rhythmic tapping on the door in the same pattern. It's clear now this isn't random. This is the ritual of 3 knocks. In parts of Flanders, Normandy, and the Low Countries, this tradition marked the moment when fertility spirits, or depending on who you asked, the ancestors were invited into the room. The knocks symbolized a request for blessing, and the couple was expected to answer in kind. Historians still argue whether it was meant literally as a supernatural invocation, or figuratively as a cue for the next part of the night's events. You hesitate for a heartbeat, then raise your hand to the bedpost and give 3 answering taps. They sound louder than you expect in the stillness, the wood carrying the vibration through the frame. The response from outside is immediate. The 3 knocks return, but now accompanied by the faint jingle of metal, perhaps a charm or bell being rung. A fringe detail comes to mind. In some villages, a bell was rung during this exchange to frighten away jealous spirits before the ancestors could enter. The same bell might later be hung above the couple's door for the first year of marriage as a talisman. The knocking stops. For a long moment, there's only silence, as if the room is holding its breath. Then, from outside the door comes the sound of fabric brushing stone and a soft murmur of voices. You can't make out the words, but the tone is low and steady, almost chant-like. Inside the chamber, the air feels subtly different, cooler at your back, warmer near your feet. You wonder if it's just the draft from the window shutters, but the change seems to have happened too quickly. The rosemary under the mattress releases a sharper scent, mingling with the myrrh from the earlier masking ritual. You reach for the cup on the table, finding it empty. The wine jug is still half full, so you pour a little the liquid, catching the candlelight in a slow, syrupy flow. You and your spouse share at the warmth, a counterpoint to the odd coolness near the wall. Then, just as you set the goblet down, there's a soft scrape against the floorboards near the door, something being slid under. You lean forward to see, and there, halfway across the rushes, is a small wooden disc. Carved into it are 3 concentric circles, each one painted in alternating black and red. It's smooth to the touch, slightly warm and faintly scented with beeswax. In certain northern traditions, this disc was a gate token placed in the room after the 3-knock exchange. Its circles represented the household, the community, and the wider world, with the couple at the center. It was said to seal the blessings into the space, keeping them from dissipating before dawn. Your spouse takes the token and places it on the table beside the folded strip of linen. The 2 objects look oddly alike in importance, even though one is meant for display and the other for inspection. Outside, the voices have faded, replaced by the faint scrape of retreating steps. The bolts on the door remain in place, and the corridor grows silent again. The room feels denser now, as though the knocks, the chants, and the token have layered another invisible wall between you and the outside world. The bed creaks softly as you shift the hidden charms beneath, still pressing up through the straw. Historians still debate whether the ritual of 3 knocks marked the true midpoint of the night's proceedings, or if it was simply a precursor to the most private moments. In either case, you can feel the chamber adjusting around you, quieter, darker, and yet somehow more awake. Then the hearth pops, sending a brief flurry of sparks upward, and you think you hear just faintly a 4th knock. Only this time it comes from inside the room. The 4th knock is so soft you almost convince yourself it was the fire shifting. But then it comes again, slightly louder, and this time you can pinpoint it not from the wall or the door, but from the far side of the hearth. It's a single deliberate tap, as if something or someone wanted to announce its presence without stepping fully into view. You lean forward, peering past the bed curtains toward the fireplace. The log in the grate glows faintly, its edges collapsing into ash. The light from it throws long, uneven shadows across the stones, deepening the dark pockets where the wall meets the floor. There's a faint tick, 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 like the sound of nails or claws against wood. Slowly, the knocking shifts into a rhythmic scrape 3 times, followed by stillness. Your spouse sits up slightly, the movement rustling the coverlet. In medieval households, the hearth was considered more than just a source of heat. It was the symbolic heart of the home. In certain wedding night traditions, the fire was kept burning until dawn as a reflection of the couple's own endurance. Historians still argue whether noises from the hearth were taken as omens or as harmless quirks of the settling wood. But in folk tales, knocks from that corner could mean an ancestor or a protective spirit was checking in. You remember a fringe detail in some low-country villages. A small stone would be placed in the hearth before the ceremony, marked with the family crest or initials. If it cracked during the night, it was a bad sign, If it stayed intact, the marriage was thought to be solid. You wonder if such a stone might be hidden under the glowing log now. The noise stops, replaced by the soft hiss of the embers. Then, without warning, the fire flares just for a second, casting a bright, almost golden light over the bed. In that moment, you notice something in the shadowed corner near the base of the hearth. A small cloth pouch, tied with red thread. You hadn't seen it before, and you're certain it wasn't there earlier. You slip from the bed, the rushes cool under your bare feet, and crouch beside the pouch. It's warm, as if it's been sitting there for hours. When you pick it up, it rattles faintly dried seeds, perhaps, or tiny stones. The scent is herbal, but unfamiliar, sharp enough to make your eyes sting slightly. Your spouse watches from the bed as you untie the red thread. Inside are 3 items: a small, flat pebble, smooth and gray, a dried sprig of sage, and a folded scrap of parchment with a single line of writing in Latin. You can't read all of it, but you recognize the word fidelitas, faithfulness. You place the pouch on the table next to the wooden disc from the earlier ritual. The collection of tokens is growing linen strip, carved disc pouch of sage and stone. Each one feels deliberate, as if the night is assembling its own quiet altar. From the hearth, the embers shift again, settling into a steady, low glow. The air smells faintly of sage, now mingling with the rosemary from the mattress charms. The stillness returns, but it's not empty, it's thick layered, as though the room is holding all these gestures in a kind of invisible weave. You settle back onto the bed, the mattress creaking softly under the weight of the moment. Historians still debate whether the hearth's role in wedding night rituals was practical, simply to keep the couple warm, or symbolic, binding them to the home's spiritual center. Tonight it feels like both. The warmth seeps into your bones, even as the shadows keep their watch in the corners. Your spouse leans closer, their voice barely above a whisper. It's not over yet, they say. You know they're right. The hearth may have gone quiet, but the night still has more to give. And right on cue, somewhere beyond the door, footsteps approach, again slow measured, bringing with them the next piece of this long, winding ceremony. The footsteps approach with a pace that's neither hurried nor hesitant, the kind of gait belonging to someone who has done this many times before. The bolts slide back, the door opens, and in step 2 figures, one older, one young, both carrying small bundles wrapped in cloth. They move with quiet purpose, barely glancing at the bed as they make their way to the table. The older one, a man with a thick woolen cloak and a cap pulled low over his brow, unties his bundle to reveal a collection of knotted ribbons. Some are made of silk, others of plain homespun, each dyed in deep hues, crimson, indigo, forest green. The younger one, perhaps no more than 16, unwraps hers to show dried flowers and carved wooden charms shaped like crescents, stars, and looping vines. Neither speaks at first. They begin laying the items out in a deliberate pattern across the table, ribbons crossing over each other in diagonals, charms placed at intersections, flowers set between. The arrangement is almost geometric, a lattice of color and shape that seems to grow outward toward the bed. You watch in silence, but curiosity pulls you forward. The man notices and finally speaks, his voice low and steady. These are to bind, but not to trap. To remind, but not to weigh. It's not an explanation so much as a fragment of an old saying, one you suspect he's repeated at many such nights. In parts of medieval Germany and the Baltic coast, it was common for newlyweds to exchange tokens of binding before the first night was over. Historians still argue whether this was a literal magical binding, an oath sealed by charms, or simply a symbolic reminder of loyalty and shared fortune. The knotted ribbons often represented vows, the carved charms, standing for blessings from the natural world. The younger woman steps closer to the bed, carrying 3 ribbons and 2 charms. She places one ribbon on your pillow, another on your spouse's, and the third across the foot of the bed. The charms she lays on the coverlet between you, a crescent moon and a spiral. Moon for watching, spiral for growing, she murmurs almost to herself. A fringe detail comes to mind. In certain fishing villages of Brittany, the spiral charm was always carved from driftwood collected after a storm. It was believed to carry the strength of the sea's turmoil channeled into resilience for the marriage. You wonder if this one has a similar story. The man ties one of the remaining ribbons loosely around your wrist, then does the same for your spouse. The knot is simple, easy to undo, but the fabric feels warm from his hands. It will come off when the sun rises, he says. Once the ribbons and charms are placed, the older man steps back and begins humming not a song you recognize, but something with a steady, swaying rhythm. The younger woman joins in their voices, weaving together until it feels less like music and more like a low current running through the room. They don't stay long. When they leave, they take nothing with them. The ribbons, flowers, and charms remain in place, part of the room now. The bolts slide back into place, and the key turns in the lock once more. The silence that follows isn't heavy this time, it's almost companionable, the air filled with the faint scent of dried flowers and whatever wood the charms were carved from. You turn the spiral charm over in your fingers, feeling the ridges where the knife has worked the grain. It's not perfect. The spiral wobbles slightly near the center, giving it a handmade quality that makes it feel alive. The ribbon on your wrist itches faintly, not unpleasantly, like a reminder that something is there. Across from you, your spouse runs their fingers along the moon charm, tracing its curve. The lattice on the table is still there, each crossing of ribbon catching the candlelight, like a web holding the night's intentions in place. Historians still debate whether these tokens were meant to last beyond the night. Some accounts suggest they were kept in a chest and brought out every anniversary. Others say they were burned the next morning, sending the vows into the air. You don't yet know which fate these charms will meet. The fire in the hearth shifts the glow, brushing over the ribbons and making the crimson one look almost molten. The herbs under the mattress release another faint pulse of scent, rosemary, thyme, and now a hint of lavender from the flowers on the table. You settle back against the pillows, the ribbon's knot resting lightly against your skin. It feels less like a binding and more like a tether, something holding you in the center of this long, deliberate night. But the tether won't hold forever. Outside footsteps stir again this time, accompanied by the faint clink of metal armor perhaps, or the buckle of a belt. Whatever comes next, it's bringing a different sort of watchfulness. The sound is unmistakable now. Metal shifting with each step, a muted chime of buckle against buckle like a soft alarm that warns of authority. The bolts slide back once more, and the door opens to reveal a single figure, a man in a dark wool tunic with a mail coif hanging loose around his shoulders. His belt holds no sword tonight, but the weight of it is still there in the way he moves. He steps inside without asking, his boots quiet on the rushes. In one hand, he carries a 3-legged stool. In the other, a small wooden cross wrapped in red thread. He shuts the door behind him, sliding the bolts home again, not to keep you in, but to keep everything else out. Without speaking, he carries the stool to the foot of the bed and sits. His posture is rigid, his gaze steady, not on you exactly, but on the space around you, as though he's watching for something you can't see. The cross rests across his knees, the thread catching the candlelight in tiny flashes. You've heard of this before. In some regions of England, Flanders and the Rhineland, the couple's first night was accompanied by a bed guard, someone chosen to stay awake and keep watch until dawn. Historians still argue whether this was meant to protect from spirits, prevent intrusions, or simply ensure no one disturbed the tokens and charms already in place. The man says nothing for several minutes. His eyes move from the table to the hearth, to the curtains of the bed and back again. When he finally speaks, his voice is low but firm. "Sleep if you can. I'll keep the hours." You're not sure whether to be reassured or unnerved. Having someone watch you so openly is strange after the earlier rituals, which were full of bustling attendants and symbolic acts. This is different, quieter, sharper. He is not here to perform for the room. He is here to make sure the room stays exactly as it is. A fringe detail you remember: in parts of Brittany, the bed guard was required to keep a small flame burning at all times, feeding it with bits of resin or herbs. If the flame went out before sunrise, it was a bad omen. Here the hearth's glow seems to serve that role, though the man occasionally glances toward the nearest candle, as if gauging its strength. The ribbon on your wrist feels heavier now, though it hasn't moved. The spiral charm rests near your hip, warm from your body heat. The scents in the air, rosemary, lavender, and the faint myrrh from earlier, seem sharper in the stillness. Outside the door, the corridor is silent. Even the revelry below has faded to the occasional muffled cheer, too distant to be more than a reminder that the rest of the world exists. The man's presence makes the chamber feel both smaller and safer, as though it's been reduced to just this bed, this table, this hearth. He shifts slightly on the stool, leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees. "The ribbon stays on," he says quietly, as though reading your thoughts. "Don't untie it until the sun comes in through the east window." Historians still debate whether the bed guard was ever truly necessary, or if it was an honorific role given to a trusted friend or relative. In stories, they sometimes served as confidants, hearing whatever the couple whispered in the small hours. Other times, they were silent sentinels, leaving without a word when the light returned. The man tilts his head slightly, as if catching a sound you can't hear. He listens for a long moment, then relaxes again. "Only the wind," he mutters. You're not so sure the air in the room hasn't stirred. You lie back slowly, the ribbon brushing against the coverlet. The spiral charm shifts under your hand, the carved ridges catching on your skin. Across the bed, your spouse's eyes are still open, fixed on the quiet guard at the foot. Time passes in a strange way, now measured not by clocks or bells, but by the small adjustments of the man's posture and the occasional crack of the hearth. The guard doesn't speak again, but once when a candle gutters, he stands to trim the wick before resuming his seat. In the deep stillness, you start to feel the edge of sleep. The night's weight is settling fully now, and the presence at the foot of the bed is almost like another charm, silent, steady, and holding back whatever might come. But you know that when he leaves, the chamber will change again, and eventually someone will come to wake you. The guard's silhouette at the foot of the bed becomes part of the room, so still that you sometimes have to glance twice to be sure he hasn't turned to stone. Time slides in uneven stretches, minutes pooling like water, then spilling forward without warning. You think you might have drifted in and out of shallow sleep, though each time you open your eyes, the guard's posture hasn't changed. Then comes the faintest sound from outside, a single knock. Not the triple pattern from earlier, just one sharp and solitary. The guard doesn't move, but his eyes flick toward the door. The knock is followed by a voice, quiet but distinct. Through the thick wood dawns broth. The words sound almost ceremonial. The guard stands his stool, scraping lightly on the rushes and crosses to the door. He slides the bolts back, but only halfway, keeping the chain latch hooked. Through the narrow gap, a small hand passes in a covered cup made of heavy clay steam curling from the lip. The guard takes it, nods once, and shuts the door again. The bolts slide home. He turns toward you and sets the cup on the table. "For you both," he says. His voice is softer now, the formal edge gone. The aroma hits first rich savory with a faint sweetness under the surface. It's a broth of some kind, the steam carrying the scent of herbs you recognize: sage, parsley, maybe marjoram. In some parts of medieval Europe, the morning broth was an essential part of the wedding night ritual, served at first light, or just before, as a seal on the night's fortunes. Historians still argue whether its ingredients were chosen for their supposed effects on vitality, or simply for comfort after a long, cold vigil. The guard hands you the cup. It's warm enough to sting your palms slightly, and when you take a sip, the flavor is both earthy and bright, like something grown close to the soil. You pass it to your spouse, who drinks before setting it back on the table. A fringe detail you recall in some Breton villages: the broth was made with an egg poached directly in it, the yolk unbroken, symbolizing the whole marriage. If the yolk burst in the bowl, it was said to be unlucky. You peer into the cup, but see only clear broth, small flecks of green herbs, drifting like tiny leaves. The guard doesn't drink, though you notice his eyes soften slightly as he watches you both take your turns. Perhaps his role is to witness this as much as to deliver it. When the cup is empty, he collects it, wraps the lid back over it, and sets it aside. "You'll have the rest after the sun is up," he says. Then he returns to his stool, the cross still resting on his knees. The broth's warmth lingers in your chest, chasing away some of the heaviness from the long night. For a while, the room is quiet again. The hearth's embers glow faintly, shadows stretching long over the table where the ribbon lattice charms and tokens still lie in place. You're struck by how little the arrangement has shifted. It's as if time has been suspended in the chamber. The guard glances toward the east-facing window, though its shutters are still closed tight. "Won't be long now," he murmurs. His tone carries both relief and a faint hint of finality. Historians still debate whether the morning broth marked the true end of the wedding night rites, or whether it was only a prelude to the public display that often followed. In some places, the broth was the last private act before the couple rejoined the household. In others, it was more like a fortifying dose before being paraded in front of curious eyes. You lean back against the pillows, the ribbon still tied around your wrist. The guard notices and nods approvingly. It's still in place, as it should be, until the first shaft of sunlight crosses the bed. Outside, somewhere far below, you hear a door open and close. The muffled thud of boots on stone follows, joined by the faint clatter of metal vessels, perhaps servants preparing for the morning meal. The castle is beginning to stir. The guard shifts, straightens his back, and rests one hand lightly on the stool's seat. "When the light comes, I leave. Until then, no one enters." The words are plain, but they land with a weight that makes the room feel just a little smaller. You can't decide whether you'll miss his watchfulness when he goes, or if you'll be relieved to have the chamber entirely to yourselves. The broth's warmth has made you drowsy again, but the pale anticipation of dawn seems to keep your mind tethered to the waking world. You watch the faint seam of light that marks where the shutters meet, wondering how much longer until it spills open. And then just before your eyes can close, the guard turns his head toward the door, listening. Footsteps, brisk, confident, are approaching. The footsteps grow louder, firm, but not hurried, their sound distinct against the stone corridor. The guard at the foot of the bed doesn't move until the boots stop directly outside the door. Then he stands, shoulders squared, one hand resting lightly on the wooden cross, still draped in red thread. 3 heavy knocks. Not the hesitant triple tap of the earlier rituals, but the kind meant to be heard through thick oak and stone. The guard unlatches the bolts, his movements deliberate. When the door swings open, the threshold is filled with daylight, pale and thin, but unmistakably morning. Behind it stands a small group led by a woman in a dark blue gown with a chain of keys at her waist. Without asking permission, they file in. The woman carries a folded length of embroidered cloth, and behind her 2 younger attendants hold wicker baskets. One basket is filled with fresh bread rolls, their tops dusted with flour. The other contains small parcels wrapped in waxed linen. The guard steps aside but doesn't leave. He stands by the wall, watchful as the newcomers move toward the bed. The woman in blue greets you both with a nod. "You will come to the hall," she says, not a request, but an instruction. This is the public display, a custom in many parts of medieval Europe, especially among the nobility and well-to-do townsfolk. The newlyweds, still dressed from the night before, were expected to appear before family, friends, and retainers to receive congratulations, teasing, and sometimes pointed questions. Historians still argue whether this was truly celebratory or a subtle form of communal inspection. The woman lays the embroidered cloth across the bed, smoothing it with a practiced hand. The design is intricate, a border of vines and flowers surrounding a central image of 2 clasped hands beneath a crown. It's ceremonial, meant to be seen when you walk through the hall. The younger attendants begin unpacking their baskets. The bread rolls are placed on the table next to the ribbon lattice and wooden charms, while the waxed linen parcels are set at the foot of the bed. One is opened to reveal a cluster of sugared almonds, their pale shells gleaming in the candlelight. A fringe detail you remember in certain Italian cities, these almonds were called confetti and were distributed to guests as symbols of fertility, sweetness, wrapped around a hard core. In some versions of the custom, the couple was expected to eat a few in front of everyone as part of the morning's display. The woman in blue gestures for you and your spouse to sit up. She adjusts the coverlet so it lies flat, smoothing away the creases from the long night. The ribbon tied around your wrist catches her eye, and she nods approvingly. It's still in place, which seems to matter. The guard finally moves, stepping forward to hand her the wooden cross. She tucks it under one arm, as if it's simply another item to be carried into the hall. His duty, it seems, is finished. Without a word, he retrieves his stool, gives a small bow, and slips quietly out of the room. The air changes slightly, without him less guarded, but also less anchored. The woman notices your glance toward the door and says, "The hall is waiting." Historians still debate whether the public display was originally a form of witness proof that the couple had in fact shared the night, or whether it was simply an extension of the wedding feast, giving guests another excuse to gather. Either way, the expectation is clear: you will walk into that hall as you are carrying with you the visible signs of the night's rituals. You and your spouse rise the mattress, releasing a faint sigh of straw as you step onto the rushes. The attendants move quickly, wrapping you both in cloaks lined with fur against the chill of the morning. The ribbon on your wrist remains the spiral charm tucked into your palm. The woman in blue takes the folded linen strip from the table, holding it, as one might carry an important document. You suspect you'll see it again soon. The tokens, the wooden disc, the pouch from the hearth, are left where they are, their work for the night complete. The door is open now, the corridor bright with the pale light of early day. You can hear voices ahead echoing in the high-vaulted space of the great hall. Laughter, clinking cups, and the low hum of conversation weave together into something warm but charged. As you take the first step into the hall, you feel the weight of eyes turning towards you, not hostile but curious, expectant. The embroidered cloth is unfurled, the clasped hands and crown facing outward for all to see. The teasing begins almost at once, calls from across the room, laughter from the nearest benches. Someone raises a cup in salute. Another calls out a proverb about long nights and strong harvests. It's impossible to tell how much is genuine blessing and how much is jest, but here both serve the same purpose, to fold you into the living memory of the community. You make your way toward the high table, the path lined with faces you will see for years to come. The night in the chamber already feels like a story they'll retell at every gathering, each time a little more exaggerated. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you know there is still more to this morning, because the bread breaking has yet to come. The woman in blue guides you and your spouse toward the center of the great hall, where a small space has been cleared between the high table and the nearest benches. The air is warmer here, thick with the mingled smells of roasted meat, baking bread, and the faint tang of spilled ale. Sunlight filters through the high, narrow windows, dust motes swirling in golden shafts above the crowd. On a low table in front of the high seat rests a single round loaf of bread, large enough that it could feed half a dozen people. Its crust is dark and shiny, brushed with something sweet before baking, and the surface is scored with a pattern of interwoven lines. The bread sits alone on a wooden board, waiting. An older man, broad-shouldered with a heavy silver clasp on his cloak, steps forward. In one hand, he holds a small wooden mallet. In the other, a dish of coarse salt. Without introduction, he lifts the bread and sets it high above his head for all to see. A cheer rises from the benches. This is the bread-breaking ritual, still common in parts of England, France, and the Low Countries, well into the late Middle Ages. The loaf, whole and uncut, symbolized the unity of the couple. Breaking it was meant to release blessings like seeds scattered into the air. Historians still argue whether the practice began as a fertility rite or as a public demonstration of the household's ability to provide food. The man lowers the bread and sets it back on the board. He sprinkles the salt over the crust in slow, deliberate passes, the grains catching in the scored lines, like frost on furrows. Then he hands the loaf to you and your spouse together. The weight of it is surprising, solid, warm from the oven and smelling faintly of honey. A fringe detail comes to mind. In some Flemish villages, the loaf was baked with a coin hidden inside. Whoever found the coin was said to be blessed with luck for the year. In wedding feasts, if the bride or groom found it, it was taken as a sign the marriage would prosper. The crowd quiets, the silence tinged with anticipation. You and your spouse exchange a glance, then raise the bread together and bring it down against the edge of the board. The crust cracks with a satisfying sound, splitting into two halves that reveal the pale, steaming crumb inside. The cheer that follows is loud enough to shake the rafters. Guests crowd closer, reaching for the torn edges. You hand pieces to the nearest hands, the bread disappearing almost as quickly as it's broken. In the crush of movement, you can't tell whether anyone has found a coin. The older man gestures for the two of you to each take a piece for yourselves. You do the warmth and sweetness of the bread filling your mouth, grounding you for a moment in something simple after the long night of layered rituals. Historians still debate the order of events in different regions, whether the bread breaking came before or after the public display, or whether it was done privately in some households. Here it is clearly part of the morning's theater, another step in weaving the union into the fabric of the community. As the bread is passed around, the woman in blue retrieves the embroidered cloth and folds it carefully. The linen strip from the bedchamber remains in her possession, hidden from view for now. It will likely be shown, or at least mentioned, before the day's celebrations end. The high table's servants step forward, with more bread platters of cheese and pitchers of ale. The hall fills with the sound of conversation, laughter, and the occasional burst of song from a corner, where a group of younger guests have gathered. You are offered a seat near the head of the table, the better for everyone to see you. The bread breaking may be done, but its meaning lingers. You can see it in the way older couples at the benches glance at each other when they taste their piece, and in the way the younger ones look at you and your spouse as though imagining their own turn someday. A small boy runs up to the table clutching something in his fist. When he opens it, you see a dull silver coin, slightly greasy from the bread. The cheer that follows is smaller, but still hearty. The coin is passed from hand to hand before being given to him as a keepsake. Whether he understands its supposed luck is anyone's guess. The morning light is stronger now, pouring across the long trestle tables. The air is warm with food and voices, but you can feel the subtle shift that means the formal part of the morning is almost over. Soon, you will leave the hall, and when you do, the procession will begin. The woman in blue appears again at your side, her chain of keys catching the light. "It's time," she says simply, and the servants begin clearing a narrow path from the high table to the great doors of the hall. Conversations hush, replaced by the scrape of benches being pushed back. You and your spouse rise, the embroidered cloak draped back over your shoulders. The ribbon is still tied at your wrist. Its knot secures the spiral charm tucked safely into your palm. The linen strip has vanished into the keeping of the attendants. Whatever fate awaits, it will happen later away from the hall. At the great doors, the steward waits, a tall staff in his hands, topped with a small pennant bearing the household's colors. He raps the staff against the floor, 3 times the sound echoing in the vaulted space. The doors are thrown open and daylight floods in. Outside, the courtyard is filled with people. Not just the wedding guests, but townsfolk, market sellers, and children perched on the edges of carts to get a better view. They part to make a lane lined with sprigs of greenery and winter flowers, ivy, holly, and whatever else could be found this time of year. This is the post-night procession, a tradition meant to display the newlyweds to the wider community. In some places, it was a noisy, chaotic parade. In others, a solemn walk accompanied by blessings and music. Historians still argue whether its main purpose was to honor the couple or to remind them and everyone else of their new public role. The steward sets off at a slow pace, the staff tapping the cobblestones in steady rhythm. You and your spouse follow hand in hand, while the crowd cheers and throws handfuls of petals and small coins. The air is cold but bright, and the sunlight flashes off the frost, still clinging to the eaves. A fringe detail you recall in certain alpine towns, the procession route always circled the church once before ending at the couple's home. This was said to seal the marriage under the eye of the divine, and to give the community a second chance to witness the pair together. Here, the path winds through the market square past the shuttered stalls before turning toward the main street. Musicians appear from somewhere in the crowd, 2 with shawms, 1 with a small drum, and begin playing a bright looping tune. Children skip alongside, trying to match the rhythm, while older women toss sprigs of rosemary at your feet. The scent rises in bursts as you step on them, sharp and clean in the winter air. Halfway along the route, an old man steps forward holding out a carved wooden spoon. Without breaking stride, your spouse accepts it, and the crowd laughs in approval. In local custom, a spoon was a token of hospitality, meant to ensure that the new household would never lack for food to serve guests. As you near the end of the route, the crowd begins to thin, though the music continues. The steward leads you back toward the castle gates, where a small platform has been set up just inside. Here you are expected to stand while the last of the townsfolk file past, offering their own blessings or in some cases light-hearted jests. A woman in a thick wool shawl hands you a small cake wrapped in cloth, whispering that it will bring sweetness to the year ahead. A boy presents a string of dried apples, which he insists will keep you from hunger during winter. Each gift is placed into a basket, carried by one of the attendants, walking just behind you. Historians still debate whether these offerings were ever kept, or if they were redistributed among the poor afterward. Whatever their fate, they feel like small threads tying you to the people who share this place. When the last well-wisher has passed, the steward wraps his staff again. The musicians fall silent, and the crowd begins to disperse, heading back toward the hall or into the town beyond. The woman in blue appears once more, gesturing for you to follow her back through the gates. The courtyard is quieter now, the cobblestones scattered with crushed petals and flattened sprigs of rosemary. The scent lingers in the cold air, mingling with the faint smell of bread from the kitchens. You're led not back to the great hall, but toward a side door that opens into a smaller corridor. The warmth here is immediate, the torchlight soft after the glare of winter sun. The ribbon at your wrist feels looser now, as though it knows its time is almost done. The woman in blue pauses before a heavy oak door bound with iron. "One last rite before the feast," she says. Her tone is calm, but there's something in her eyes, something between formality and mischief, that makes you wonder what exactly waits on the other side. Because this door, unlike the others you've passed through today, is bound not with a lock, but with a ribbon tied in an elaborate knot. The ribbon is a deep crimson, its satin edges frayed from handling. It's tied in an intricate pattern across the door, looping twice around the iron latch and ending in a knot shaped almost like a flower. Someone has gone to the trouble of braiding thin strands of gold thread through the weave so that when the torchlight hits it, the knot glimmers faintly. Two young attendants stand on either side of the door, their hands clasped neatly in front of them. Between them, on a small stool, rests a shallow wooden tray. On it is a slip of parchment covered in careful handwriting and a small bronze key. The parchment is weighted down by a smooth river stone, as if to keep it from fluttering in the torchlight's heat. The woman in blue gestures toward the tray. "The key is yours," she says, "but only when the knot is undone." She steps back, leaving you and your spouse alone in front of the door. This is the riddle of the tied door, a custom found in scattered pockets of medieval Europe, especially in border regions where traditions mingled and overlapped. The knot's complexity was a measure of the family's humor or hospitality, sometimes simple enough to undo in moments, sometimes so elaborate it could keep the couple occupied for the better part of an hour. Historians still argue whether the knot was meant as a playful challenge or a symbolic test of cooperation between the newlyweds. You pick up the parchment. The handwriting is neat, but curling the ink slightly smudged. The riddle reads, "I fly without wings, I cry without eyes. Whenever I go, darkness flies." It's not a difficult puzzle, the answer is the sun. But tradition demands that you speak the answer aloud together before you touch the knot. You exchange a glance with your spouse, then say it in unison. The attendants nod, but they don't move to untie the ribbon for you. This part clearly is your work. A fringe detail you recall in some French towns, the knot wasn't tied with ribbon at all, but with a chain threaded through the door's handles, and the riddle was a task stacking a small tower of cups, balancing an egg on a spoon, meant to be done in front of an amused crowd. Here the test is quieter, the challenge woven in silk. You reach for the knot fingers, tracing the gold-threaded loops. The weave is tighter than it looks, and the satin slips under your touch. Your spouse holds one side steady, while you work the other, loosening one loop at a time. The sound is faint but distinct, the hiss of fabric sliding against fabric. As the knot loosens, the gold thread unwinds in slow spirals, catching the light. The attendants watch without speaking, their expressions unreadable. Finally, the last loop falls free, and the ribbon slips into your hands, warm from the friction of the work. One of the attendants takes the ribbon, folds it neatly, and places it into a small chest at her feet. The other hands you the bronze key, the metal cool and slightly rough against your palm. Historians still debate whether the key was a literal necessity or purely symbolic, an object you already had in a sense, but one that tradition insisted you earn. In this case, the lock is real. You slide the key into the latch, feeling the heavy tumblers shift before the mechanism clicks open. The door swings inward on oiled hinges, revealing a smaller, warmer room beyond. The air is rich with the scent of spiced bread and fresh herbs, and on a central table rests a spread of food, clearly meant for two: a small roast, a basket of rolls, a dish of figs, and a jug of dark wine. The woman in blue steps forward again, her eyes glinting. You'll eat here before rejoining the feast. What's taken apart, she nods toward the ribbon chest, is replaced with something whole. The attendants withdraw, leaving you and your spouse in the quiet of the room. The bronze key still rests in your hand. You place it on the table beside the jug, feeling the shift from ritual to respite. The ribbon challenge was playful, but it leaves a lingering awareness. Every step today, every knot, cup, and crumb of bread has been about binding and unbinding, sealing and releasing. The door was tied shut. Now it stands open. The night was locked. Morning has set it free. You sit down to eat the fire in the small hearth, casting a steady glow. Outside the door, you can still hear faint strains of music from the great hall. But in here, the only sound is the quiet clink of plates and the occasional creak of the wooden chairs. For the first time since yesterday, you're left to speak to each other without witnesses' attendance or an audience waiting for your next move. Yet even in this privacy, the weight of the day's remaining customs presses lightly at the edges. Because once the bread and wine are gone, the next rite, the sharing of the feast, awaits you back in the hall. The small meal in the side room is warm and filling, but it's clearly not meant to last long. The roast is tender, seasoned with rosemary and garlic, and the figs burst with sweetness under your teeth. The wine is darker than what you drank last night, heavier, its warmth lingering in your throat. Still, every bite feels like an interlude rather than a conclusion, fuel for the next act, rather than the final curtain. When you've eaten enough to take the edge off your hunger, the woman in blue returns as punctual as a tolling bell. She doesn't ask if you're ready. She simply gathers the empty plates, leaves the jug half full, and gestures toward the door. "The hall is waiting," she says, and you know this is not a suggestion. You follow her back into the corridor. The air is warmer now, carrying the smell of roasted meat and baking pies. The sound of conversation and clinking cups swells as you approach the great hall, and when the doors open, the wave of heat, scent, and noise rolls over you like a tide. The long trestle tables are crowded again, every bench full. The bread from earlier has been replaced with platters of roasted game-boiled root vegetables and great wheels of cheese. The high table bears the richest spread pies, glazed in gold leaf baskets of sugared fruits, even small bowls of almonds rolled in cinnamon. This is the sharing of the feast, a moment when the newlyweds serve or are served dishes reserved for them alone. In some traditions, the couple feeds each other first. In others, they must take the first bite from a specific dish before it's divided among the guests. Historians still argue whether this was a symbolic act of generosity or a more practical way to control the order of service. You and your spouse are led to a small raised platform at the side of the high table. Here, a servant presents you with a silver platter, holding a pie unlike any other on the table. Its crust is sculpted into the shapes of intertwined vines and tiny birds, the edges glazed to a glossy amber. The smell is rich, savory, with a hint of fruit beneath. The woman in blue hands you a small knife with a bone handle. "Cut together," she says, stepping back so the crowd can see. You and your spouse place your hands on the handle, pressing down in unison. The crust cracks with a sound almost as satisfying as the bread breaking earlier. Inside is a filling of spiced pigeon and figs, the juices thick and dark. You lift the first slice onto a plate and, without being told, offer it to your spouse. They do the same for you. The crowd reacts with a cheer, a few voices calling out blessings or jokes about long life and full cupboards. A fringe detail you recall in certain English manners: this dish would hide a single whole almond among the filling. Whoever found it was said to hold the key to the household's prosperity. You glance at your plate, wondering if the almond is there, but find only tender meat and soft fruit. Once you've eaten your first bites, servants carry the rest of the pie to the lower tables, dividing it among the guests. Other dishes follow: platters of roasted quail, bowls of stewed apples, and a strange jewel-colored jelly made from spiced wine. Each time a dish is brought to you first, you take a token taste before it's whisked away to the others. The symbolism is clear enough. The household's wealth flows outward from the high table to the rest of the hall, and your role as the new couple is to stand at that source. It's both an honor and a responsibility, though the cheering and laughter soften its weight. Between dishes, the musicians strike up again, shawms, drums, and the occasional deep hum of a bowed viol. Children dart between the benches, chasing each other with sprigs of rosemary. Older guests raise cups in your direction, toasting you with wine, ale, or even bowls of milk for those too young to drink. Historians still debate whether the feast sharing was originally a form of oath-taking, with the first bites acting as a pledge to feed the household. Whatever its origin, the effect here is to draw you deeper into the communal web, every bite a thread tying you to these people. When the last special dish has been served, the woman in blue leans close and murmurs, "There's one more part yet, a lighter thing." Her tone is unreadable, but the faint curl of her mouth suggests mischief. The servants begin clearing the tables at the center of the hall, pushing benches to the sides to create an open space. Guests shift forward eagerly, some standing on benches to get a better view. The musicians change their tune to something quick and playful. And then you see them, three young men in travel-stained cloaks, grinning like foxes slipping through the side door. Each carries a coil of rope. You know without being told that this is the start of the mock capture game. The three young men move into the cleared space with the easy confidence of those who have played this part before. Their ropes aren't the coarse hemp of real work, but softer cords dyed bright red and green, each one tipped with a tassel that swings like a cat's tail with every step. The crowd leans forward, a murmur of anticipation rippling through the hall. The musicians quicken their tune, shawms trilling high, the drum tapping out a heartbeat rhythm. One of the men bows low toward your spouse while another gives you an exaggerated salute. The third stands between you, grinning like he's about to deliver the punchline of a joke. This is the mock capture game, a custom that lingers in records from Burgundy, Saxony, and parts of the Low Countries. Ostensibly playful, it involved stealing one of the newlyweds, usually the bride, and demanding some token or challenge from the other to secure their return. Historians still argue whether it was just rowdy entertainment or a symbolic reenactment of older marriage by capture traditions. Before you can react, two of the men step forward. The one with the green rope loops it loosely around your spouse's arm. The other tosses his red cord over your shoulder like a scarf, tugging you a step forward before letting go with a flourish. The crowd laughs, children craning their necks to see. The capture begins in earnest when the third man gestures dramatically toward the high table and shouts, "The ransom." His voice carries easily over the music. The woman in blue, still standing near the head of the hall, raises one eyebrow but doesn't interfere. Clearly, this is expected. A fringe detail you recall in some towns, the ransom was a quick kiss in public, given not to the spouse but to the captor. In others, it was a coin, a drink, or the promise of a future favor. Here, judging by the playful tension in the air, it will likely be food or drink. The man holding your spouse calls out, "A cup, a full one." Almost before he's finished, a servant appears with a tall goblet of spiced wine steam curling from the surface. It smells of cinnamon and cloves, the kind of drink that clings to your throat in the cold. You take the goblet and offer it to the captor, who drains it in 3 theatrical gulps before releasing your spouse with a grand bow. The crowd cheers, stamping their feet against the rush-covered floor. But the game isn't done. The second man steps forward, twirling his rope like a lasso before looping it gently around your wrist. "Now your turn," he says, grinning. He nods toward your spouse, who is already being guided playfully but firmly back toward the center of the open space. Historians still debate whether the second capture was a deliberate inversion of older customs or simply a way to prolong the fun. In either case, it allows both halves of the couple to take part in the exchange, keeping the laughter balanced. This time, the ransom demanded is more challenging. "Dance for us," the music swells, immediately shifting to a quick circling melody. The crowd begins clapping in time, their voices rising in encouragement. You and your spouse step into the open space. The ropes are dropped, leaving you free to move, but the circle of onlookers is as solid as any wall. You catch your spouse's eye, and for a moment, it's just the two of you in the center, the night's weight lifting into something lighter. You begin with a simple step, turning in time with the drum. Your spouse mirrors you, the shawms winding their tune around your movements. The crowd claps faster, the rhythm building, and soon you're spinning together the cold of the courtyard, long forgotten in the heat of the hall. A fringe custom from certain Flemish towns comes to mind. If the couple's dance ended with them touching foreheads, it was said to seal their bond against storms and sharp words. You don't know if this crowd expects it, but as the music reaches its last round, you and your spouse lean in, foreheads touching for just a heartbeat before stepping back. The hall erupts in cheers. The 3 captors retreat, grinning and bowing to the crowd before slipping back through the side door. The musicians shift to a slower tune, one meant for the rest of the guests to join. Historians still debate whether the mock capture game served a deeper symbolic role, or if it was simply an excuse for merriment. In practice, it's done what all the other rites have done, drawn you deeper into the web of shared memory that will be told and retold long after tonight fades. The woman in blue steps forward, her voice carrying easily over the fading applause. "The games are done," she says. "Now comes the last rite." Her words still in the air, the servants begin bringing forward a small, heavy chest bound in iron. Whatever is inside, it's important enough to command the attention of the entire hall. The small chest is set on a low table in the cleared space at the center of the hall. Its iron fittings catch the firelight, each hinge shaped like a curling vine, the latch secured with a thick bronze lock. The servants who carried it step back quickly, as though their work is finished, and the chest now belongs entirely to the moment. The woman in blue stands beside it, resting one hand lightly on the lid. Her voice is calm, but carries across the room what the night binds the day must bless. She looks to you and your spouse, and you understand this is not a request. It's the last act of the long chain of customs that began yesterday. She gestures for you to come forward. The crowd leans in the rustle of fabric and benches shifting, making the air feel closer. On the table beside the chest lies a small bundle wrapped in white linen. When the woman in blue unfolds it, you see the linen strip from the bedchamber now embroidered at one end with the household crest. This is the presentation of the linen, a custom that varied widely from place to place. In some noble houses, the strip was displayed openly, proof of the night's consummation. In others, it was purely symbolic, representing the joining of two households. Historians still argue whether its purpose was legal, ceremonial, or simply a way to close the long series of rites. The woman hands the strip to you. It feels lighter than you expect, the embroidery rough beneath your fingers. She nods toward the chest. Place it within. You lift the heavy lid. Inside the chest is lined with dark wool, and at its center rests a shallow silver bowl. In it lie the night's tokens, the wooden disc with its concentric circles, the pouch from the hearth, the knotted ribbons and charms, even the bronze key from the tied door. They've all been gathered here waiting. A fringe detail you recall in some regions of the Low Countries. The chest was called the Blessings Coffer, and its contents were kept sealed until the couple's first anniversary, when they would be taken out and burned in a small fire. The ashes were then scattered in the garden to fertilize the marriage. In other places, the tokens were kept for life, passed down to children as heirlooms. You place the linen gently on top of the other tokens. The silver bowl catches the movement of the firelight, making the embroidered crest seem to shimmer for a heartbeat before the lid closes. The woman in blue turns the key in the lock and removes it, placing it in your spouse's hand. "It is yours to keep or to spend," she says, the phrasing formal and slightly archaic. "But if it is lost, the blessing goes with it." The chest is lifted away by the same servants who brought it, disappearing through the side door. Its absence leaves the space feeling oddly lighter, as though a final knot has been loosed. The woman in blue steps back, and the hall seems to breathe again. The musicians strike up a slow, stately tune, one meant for the guests to take the floor in pairs. Trenchers and cups are passed out once more, the scent of wine and roasted meat rising into the beams. Historians still debate the deeper meaning of this final rite, whether it was truly a blessing or a polite way to draw a veil over the private details of the night. Either way, it marks a clear transition. The marriage is now fully a matter of public record, woven into the memory of the household and the town beyond. You and your spouse are guided back to the high table. Cups are refilled, toasts are made, and for the first time since the night began, you feel no weight of expectation, only the hum of voices, the clink of cups, and the warmth of a hall where every eye no longer follows you. The woman in blue raises her own cup and meets your gaze. "The night was yours," she says. "The day is ours. Let both remember each other well." The rest of the feast stretches ahead, full of laughter, song, and the smell of baking that still lingers from the kitchens. The tokens are sealed away, the rites completed. Outside, the winter light slips lower the day, carrying you gently toward whatever comes next. The hall's music softens, the shawms and drums fading into the background, like a dream you're already half forgetting. The fire crackles low, sending up an occasional drift of sparks that disappear into the rafters. You lean back in your seat, letting the noise of the feast wash over you in warm waves, no longer sharp and expectant, but loose blurred at the edges. Somewhere beyond the heavy walls, the town is quieting. Stalls are shuttered doors, barred against the evening cold. The frost will spread again overnight, silvering the cobblestones, just as it did before the procession this morning. But here inside, the air stays warm, heavy with the scent of rosemary and wine, the last of the roast meat cooling on the tables. The ribbon has been untied, the key pocketed, the chest sealed. The tokens are no longer yours to touch, but their presence hums quietly in the back of your mind, like the feeling of a word on the tip of your tongue, something you know but can't quite speak. Your spouse leans closer, their voice soft enough that it doesn't have to rise above the music. Whatever they say is just for you, and it pulls a small, unguarded smile to your face. The warmth in the hall feels deeper now, not just from the fire, but from the steady rhythm of conversation and the way the shadows pool softly at the edges of the room. The music shifts to a gentle lilting air, almost like a lullaby, and for the first time since yesterday evening, you feel the weight slide from your shoulders completely. The rites are done. The night and the day have met, and neither has broken. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the hum and the warmth carry you forward. End of script. Sweet dreams.